Hello, friends. I am wearing my coronavirus inspired shut in garb with my nice little sweatshirt and my grown out bangs that I have to pin back because they're becoming unruly. So I've been told that my intros are slightly on the long side. So I'm going to do my best to be quick about this one. So in this chat, I speak with Colin Wright. Colin was one of my first guests actually on this channel a year ago. We actually are talking about the same topic on biological sex. And the reason why I wanted to speak with Colin again was because a couple weeks ago, Colin ended up getting a little bit of a Twitter pile on going, surrounding a misconstrual of something that he was saying, if you can imagine that happening on Twitter. So enjoy the interview. Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you appreciate what I'm doing here. We were chatting a second ago about how you've come about on Twitter / why you're advocating for what you're advocating at the moment slightly. So can you give me a little bit of a background for the past year, I guess?
In the past year, that's a lot's been going on.
Well, when you started, we kind of were chatting about how you started off on Twitter because
I think we started. Basically, I had just published my first article in Colette that was the new evolution deniers. It was
right.
basically sort of like a coming out party for me, I guess, in a way of just finally speaking my mind. And I was, I had self-censored for a long time in academia,
Mm-hmm.
all the way through school, beginning of my postdoc. And things were just getting too nuts. People denying the reality of biological sex and things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
gender ideology taking over different things, and trans women playing in women's sports, and just all this stuff. Everyone's throwing around the word bigot and transphobe and everything. And
Mm-hmm.
it just seemed like it was absurd. And I thought I had a view I could contribute to this, but I was basically just too afraid to say anything because I didn't want to sabotage my career.
Because you are an evolutionary biologist,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so basically, I just couldn't take it anymore. So I
Mm-hmm.
I wrote this long essay. I guess it wasn't too long for Colette, and it sort of went viral. It said a lot of things. I think what a lot of people were currently thinking at the time. At least that's if you read the comments of when I first tweeted that out. That seems to be the impression. A lot of the impression too was that because in that article I talk about the denial of biological sex and sex differences in general. And there was a lot of people in the comments that were saying like, "Oh, this is a person. He's just confusing gender and sex again. Like no one's really denying the reality of biological sex." And I think
But
this last year has really shown that well, that's not true. They
yeah.
indeed are,
Yeah.
and it's being more and more difficult to deny that anyone is actually saying that biological sex, not just sex differences, but that biological sex itself is a thing. They're now saying that it doesn't exist, and so I've been sort of riding that hobby horse for the last year.
Right.
Not for any particular reason other than I think this is. I had a tweet not that long ago that went semi-viral that was saying that I think this is sort of the last. The I think I called it reality's last stand. Like if we can't all agree that something is as clear to our senses as the biological sex, we can't agree that that's real, then we're hostages to chaos. There's nothing tethering us to reality. And I see this as sort of one of those big things that if we lose that tether, I don't think we'll ever get it back. Because what else can we deny? We can deny anything if you can deny the reality of biological sex and sex differences in general.
Right.
So kind of what I've just been I guess my main focus on things like Twitter and things that I've written. Yeah, things like that. That's basically what I've been up to the last year, in a nutshell.
Okay, so I think there's one particular tweet that was the initial, "Hey, do you want to chat again, Colin?" for me
Uh-huh.
with you. I was off of Twitter for a little bit, and when I came back on, all I was seeing was you kind of saying, "Hey, thanks for the support," and I'm like, "What? Why did you need support, Colin?" Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Which
Yeah, yeah.
tweet? You suggested that the sudden rise plus 1,500% in adolescent females Presenting with gender dysphoria may be caused by social contagion, in quotes. Dynamics. Social contagion dynamics, hypothesized in Littleman's paper on rapid onset gender dysphoria. Some purposefully misrepresented it as me comparing trans people to viruses. So let's do a little unpacking of that, of an
Uh-huh.
explanation of like, what did you actually mean?
Yeah. There was an original tweet that I had deleted. I'm kind of regretting deleting it now, but I
Okay.
kind of wanted to take I wanted to take the narrative out of anyone else's hands because by itself, I guess there could have been, if you don't know that social contagion research is an actual field of research that is not like a controversial field, you can maybe, I can see how some people might read my tweet as maybe being offensive to some degree.
Because they don't
If they're giving,
understand, right? They
if
don't
they're giving,
understand what it means.
if they're just giving me like the least charitable interpretation of what I wrote. So my original tweet was basically I shared a story, an article. I think it might have been in The Economist or something. I can't remember. But it basically just charted it was talking about the 1,500% rise in trans youth that are showing up to these gender clinics claiming that they have gender dysphoria. So what my tweet did, all it was, I shared a quote from the article, and then all I added at the end was the following. I just said 2 words, colon, social contagion. That's all my tweet said. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it somehow just caught on. It became a social contagion almost of itself. It really took off because Ann Coulter ended up retweeting it, and so she's got like
Oh, okay.
2 million followers, and so that took off. Um,
You made
and
it big,
basically
man. You made it big.
it follows me now, which is bizarre.
Yeah.
But basically, what that tweet was saying is that, so there's many hypotheses, I suppose you would say, for this dramatic rise that we're seeing in gender dysphoric youth showing up to clinics. Like,
Okay.
if you were to ask trans activists, the only explanation they want is the fact that, like, oh, the social norms are being relaxed and that people now feel more comfortable to come forward with them being trans. And so that's why we're seeing more people that are coming forward,
Uh-huh.
not because more people are actually trans, but just because the social pressures to keep them from coming out have been relaxed.
Okay.
That's what they say. And I think there's probably some truth to that.
Yeah.
But there's also some evidence in Lisa Littman's paper on rapid onset gender dysphoria, where she had sort of documented the fact that sort of people coming out as trans sort of runs in social circles. And if you have a daughter or son that has a lot of friends that are trans, the likelihood that your son or daughter is going to be coming out trans, especially daughter,
Mm-hmm.
rises dramatically. And she did this through interviews with parents and the kids' social circles and things like that.
Mm.
And if you've looked at any of Benjamin Boyce's videos, and he's talked to detransitioners, and they all corroborate, like, yes, this has happened to them. You know, they got mixed up between, you know, gender norms and biological sex, and they were sort of confused about what their personalities, their gender non-conforming personalities, or preferences and mannerisms said about their biological sex. And so they kind of transitioned because of their confusion, and then they ended up regretting it.
Mm.
And that's called the social contagion hypothesis. And all the social contagion hypothesis is just saying that basically there's a social component to the rise of certain behaviors. And
Mm.
you can see this in the history with things like peanut allergies and things, saying that people claiming that they have peanut allergies, to some degree, people claiming that they have celiac disease or just like intolerance towards gluten.
Oh, yeah. Gluten free.
They're real cases, but then there's sort of a social component that's kind of trendy in a way, I guess you could say, to the point where even, I mean, in Europe, I think there's been even like a social contagion with suicide at one point, where
Oh my
you had
gosh.
you had this sweeping across Europe, just people committing suicide because it was sort of like a trendy thing to do.
Oh,
Anyway,
and then you get to see all of
yeah,
the attention at the wait, no,
yeah,
you won't because you are
yeah,
gone.
yeah.
So,
So that tweet was then retweeted by someone named Kevin Bird, who is a graduate student, I think, at the University of Michigan
mm-hmm.
or Michigan State, I think. They do like plant genetics, I think.
Okay.
And basically, I can't remember the exact wording of their tweet. It's in the tweet I did, but basically they just said something like, um, this is vile transphobia, or this is like a really transphobic thing. And then they went on to say, Colin is currently on the job market. Um, Pay attention, everyone who's hiring. This isn't the way we diversify evolution, ecology, biodiversity. That's what or behavior. That's what my field is. So basically, he included like the at for the diversify evolutionary biology the Twitter page,
Right.
basically trying to call attention to my greater scientific community and my field specifically to think twice about hiring me. Coming after my ability to get a job in my field that I've been training to become last decade, which is I think pretty appalling behavior to do. You can disagree with me about whether or not social contagion is a thing, but what they really did was they sort of made up this. So it's not a made up narrative, but it doesn't really apply. So back in the day when homosexuality was more maligned, people say that homosexuality is a social contagion. This was like a right wing tactic used to scare people about don't let your children near gay people.
Right.
And it's true that is some of the words that were used, but just because it was used in a context that we can now look upon as like that's not true. Like no one's convinced to be gay. It's and even if people could be convinced to be gay, like the worst thing that could happen would be that like, oh, you experimented and you kissed someone of the opposite sex and you regretted it later. Like no harm done, whatever.
Right.
But my argument was that for this gender dysphoria type situation, if social contagion is playing a major role that's contributing to this 1,500% or even sometimes 5,000 or more percent rise in other locations, if social factors are contributing, so if these people aren't really trans but they're thinking they are because of social factors, well, this isn't just a totally benign thing. Like being trans itself is not an issue. Like there's no issue with trans people, but the pathway that someone is normally put on when they come out and go to a gender clinic and say that they're trans is commonly affirmation therapy. So you're affirmed in the gender that you are, which leads usually to taking puberty blocking or suppressing hormones. Once you're on those lead to cross-sex hormones, invasive surgeries, double mastectomies, bottom surgery sometimes if you're a male. And these are just irreversible, and these almost always lead to permanent infertility and sterility for the rest of your life. And so it's not such a benign pathway as it would be if let's say that if being gay was a social contagion, well, there's nothing that really comes from that. There's no harm done.
Right. For experimenting.
But I think we should all maybe take pause a little bit when we're seeing this dramatic rise, especially since kids who are 16 years old, sometimes even younger, are having double mastectomies, and they're getting put on this pathway to irreversible bodily changes that what we're seeing now is some females who are now regretting these, and we're seeing detransitioners come out. And so I'm just saying pause, we need to pump the brakes a little bit, because we see this 1,500% rise, and that just begs for an explanation. Now, I think it is possible that it is lessening of social factors, less bigotry towards trans
and
people.
Stigma,
that can play some role, but there plays all the role, especially when we have a lot of this other evidence that suggests that there is some aspect of social contagion going on. And I just think it's really dangerous to say someone like me is a bigot for even just like bringing up the fact that might be playing some role. Is it the whole role? Probably not. There's probably many factors that are contributing to this, but in limiting it to only one factor, you're basically condemning these people just to this fast track towards their invasive surgeries and all of the hormones and all that. So that's what I was basically people trying to cancel me for, was the fact that I said the word social contagion with respect to gender dysphoria. Then they immediately made the connection to this was used in the context of homosexuals, and that was really bad.
Right.
And
Okay.
now I'm a terrible person now because I'm using this word, even though if you do a Google search and you see thousands of studies on social contagion theory, and it's
not bigoted at all. Well, I mentioned this to you when we first messaged back and forth, how it reminded me a little bit of the when Jordan Peterson uttered the phrase forced monogamy and people
Yeah.
freaked out of the idea of like forcing women to marry men, I guess is what they assumed, but it's a literal anthropological phrase
Mhm.
about
Yeah.
like societally enforced monogamy, like socially we enforce monogamy through like having affairs not being celebrated. You know,
Yes,
like
exactly.
that's from what I understand about that. So it reminds me a little bit of that. Now the guy, what was the person's name who tweeted out going after your job? What was his name?
Yeah, his name is Kevin Bird.
Kevin Bird. Okay, so when Kevin Bird tweeted out all of that, I guess negative stuff out about you regarding your phrasing, did he know what social contagion was in a scientific form? Like, was he ignorant or was he just
You
being
know,
willfully ignorant? Like,
with him and a lot of people that are in his circle, he has to know it's a real area of research because anyone can Google it and search for it. But he's still going to hold me to the bigoted definition because he can, and he's not going to let me, even after I explain to myself like that's not what I meant. You know, it's still terrible that I said it, even though like it's a common phrase used in research. So with him and other people, they play this game where they take something that has, it could have two different meanings, and the benign meaning is readily available for anyone to see if they want to, as long as they're not purposely take the least charitable interpretation of what you're saying. If
mm-hmm.
they just try to like look at the context, like, is Colin a bigot? Has he said any bigoted things? Like, well, if you know me, you know that I'm not just like a person who hates trans people. I'm always attacking ideas and things like that. And so he just takes the least charitable interpretation of my tweet. And even any attempt I have to clarify the fact that like this is not the way I meant it. I meant it in this other purely benign way that's just a scientific, hypothesis.
Right.
Never good enough. And so it's just, yeah. So I think there's a lot more of just like power grab trying to take me down type dynamics going on than a real attempt to understand and connect in any level.
Right. Okay, so if you, in any other category of scientific research, I guess for scientific research search's sake, would you, if you saw such a change of the plus 1500 or whatever percentage of like an increase in the rapid onset gender dysphoria, or people coming on to or people coming to the clinics, the gender clinics, I guess, if you saw such a jump in other research, would it be pretty normal to want to investigate that for us lay people?
Yeah, that's just a huge. It's indicative that something has changed in the environment somehow. I mean, and if you look, it all starts at around like 2013 is when you see like the uptick, and then in the last couple of years it really spiked. And so we want to ask ourselves, like what happened around that time that's like, that has made it such a drastic uptick in the amount of individuals that are claiming to be trans.
Right.
And it could be lessening social factors. I would expect maybe a less dramatic spike. And also, important to note is if it's really laxed social restrictions on people coming out, we would also expect to see a concomitant rise in people who are over 30 also coming out as trans.
Oh, okay.
We would probably expect to see a spike in all age ranges now that it is more socially okay to come out as trans.
Did we see that with, say, homosexual individuals? Did we see all through all age categories?
That's a good question. So I think the normalization of being gay is sort of like, I think it was more gradual. I can't really comment too much about
Okay.
how it took place.
That would be interesting, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but for at least for gender dysphoria, we just see this dramatic rise in people who are like under 20, like this 12 to 19 range, which is just like this very small range of individuals. These are the only ones that have this like insane spike in the
Mm.
number of individuals that are all of a sudden just becoming trans, and many of them without any previous history of being trans, or history of gender nonconforming behavior or claiming that they're trans. So if you look at kids who are from a very young age say that they feel like the opposite sex and they're very adamant about it, those people are much less likely to desist, through puberty and everything like that. They're much more likely to be trans the rest of their lives. If it starts very young,
Mm.
is consistent and consistent across time. But that's not the demographic we're seeing now. We're seeing this sort of rapid onset or adolescent onset gender dysphoria, where kids, mostly females with no previous history whatsoever of gender nonconforming behavior, or maybe they might be like tomboyish, but no claims that they feel like they were born in the wrong body or that they're the opposite sex,
Mm.
are all of a sudden just announcing, sometimes just out of the blue, to their parents that, I feel like, a boy if they're female, or the opposite, um, is just completely out of nowhere. And it usually has to do with the social groups that they've been a part of, uh, going onto certain websites and looking at sort of getting involved in the communities there that are sort of fast tracking people to this sort of ideology. I think a lot of part of the spike we're seeing is that the ideology surrounding gender dysphoria and being transgender, um, has just expanded so much of what trans is. So trans never used to be an ideology. It was purely just a condition that people would have, that they just have this deep internal feeling that they had been
Mm.
born in a body that they feel like they're the opposite sex, and it gives them much discomfort and
Mm.
anxiety to have the body that they have. They just don't feel like they have the body that they should have been born with.
Mm.
But sort of becoming an ideology in a sense, where it's saying that, like, I just don't identify with the gender I was assigned at birth, and now we have these non-binary identities. That's, when you boil these things down, they're just they really do boil down to people just not agreeing with these sort of regressive sex-related stereotypes, these
Right.
of masculinity and femininity. And to me, that's not what being trans is. Like, if that's being trans, then I'm trans, because I don't identify with total masculine stereotypes. Like, I'm not an aggressive person. I don't want to go out there and shoot animals and go to monster truck rallies or fights, or like, that's the
Yeah.
opposite of what I am. Like, I don't want to do that. So yeah, I mean, most people probably don't identify with the most gross stereotype of their sex, and
Right.
so we're all non-binary in this way. But what these new trans identities do, they just sort of create this false binary that never existed in the first place. Like, we've always had these diverse personalities, but now this is sort of uh, being reinterpreted as being trans, and it's just, that's why we're seeing this huge spike too, because what trans is just, the walls have been blown out. It's just anybody can be trans if,
Right.
according to these new ideologies.
And you can be trans. Yeah, I can see what you mean, because you can be trans with literally no effort, just by word or in
Exactly.
writing, or it, as far as you can possibly go with gender reassignment surgery and or sex reassignment surgery, or whatever. And so yeah, I see what you mean, how it can there's no definition for being trans. You say you are, and that's
Yeah.
as easy as it is. Do you think that, because it feels like gender could have okay, gender could have or should have been enough to conquer, or maybe changing the way we see it, um like re-establishing gender roles, or reestablishing what's okay about not following traditional gender roles. It seems like those things could have been enough, but then they came for biological sex.
Yeah.
Is what it seems like. So
Yeah.
why do you think gender wasn't enough? Because I remember when gender was same as sex. What's the gender
Yeah.
of the baby? Oh, it's, whatever, versus saying sex. And now it's like, oh, well, now it seems like gender is completely separate. And I kind of am okay with that, from how I have heard of. I think we talked about this the last time I chatted with you about
maybe a little.
gender being a spectrum or bimodal. I don't know if
Yeah,
spectrum's the right word, but it has it's sort of the roles in that people embody of their sex.
yeah.
So
I think me, along with a lot of other, I consider myself. I don't consider myself like a gender critical person, even though I have many views that are, I guess, overlapping with them.
mm,
But a lot of the like the gender critical feminist stance on gender, which they view as more of a sort of these societal norms and expectations that society puts on individuals based on their perceived sex. So we might
mhm,
look at someone who we assess as to be a female, and we're going to say, oh, they must be very, a submissive person. They're very nurturing, like those kind of things. That's kind of what gender
right.
is in idea. Just the social roles. Um, their idea of being gender critical, like they don't think gender is a good thing. They think that we need to let people, like, people shouldn't be socially enforced or, like, whipped into conforming to these certain stereotypes that we all have, these ideals of these gender roles, because they're sort of limiting. Because you can have, a female who wants to do stereotypically masculine things that,
Mhm,
most women don't do, and then society might say, this isn't, very proper for a woman to do, and it's not something, and then that'll influence them in certain ways. When I grew up in grade school, I mean, the social gender policing was pretty big. If I don't know how unique my situation was, but I think it's probably pretty typical of a lot of young adolescent boys that if you do anything that is not 100% manly, you are just called like a sissy. Everything, they're just, you're not a real man. Like, what are you, a girl? Like all that type of stuff. Like, and
yeah,
that's the gender in action. That's
right,
the social policing that's enforcing, coming down on effeminate boys, telling them that they shouldn't be that way. And it's also something that would come down on, like, a more tomboyish girl that might make them feel sort of alienated.
right.
Um, the idea is that we want to relax these social pressures and the societal norms and expectations. Not say that, like, well, if you don't fit these, then you're maybe, if you're a tomboy, now what people are saying is that,
You must
oh,
be male.
maybe you're actually a boy. Or if you're like a very effeminate male, then, like, oh, maybe since you like to play with dolls and things, maybe you're actually a little girl. And to
Mm,
me, that couldn't be more regressive, and just like this reverting back to these conservative notions of what it means to be, not even just like conservative, but like, you know, deeply regressive old conservative ways of, like, women only belong in the kitchen type of thing.
mm,
It's like, if you don't conform to these certain norms of your sex, then maybe you're actually the opposite sex trapped in the body. So
right.
it's just, it couldn't be such a more toxic thing to say. And I just think that that's just an appalling way to look at things. And I try to fight out against that, because it's that too that is also leading people to, deny the reality of biological sex, because they interchange gender and sex all the time. And
Right. Why
it's,
do they want why are the trans activists so aggressive about conquering sex for their own definition purposes? Why is that so important? In the name of inclusivity? Is that it?
I think just so they can't be questioned in any context. They're fully a woman in every context that would matter as far as society is concerned. They don't want to be limited. They don't want to go to a third, gender neutral bathroom, because that to them is perhaps making their dysphoria worse, because we're saying that you're not really a woman or something. And so they hinge on the fact that intersex people exist, and they use
Right.
that as sort of a bridge between the sexes in order to say that, well, sex is more of a spectrum. And what they're trying to do is saying that, like, well, we're all intersex to some degree. That's basically what that boils down to. And therefore, if we're all intersex to some degree, if we're all just a little bit, mixtures of male and female, then there's no lines to be drawn anywhere. And that, hell, anyone should just therefore be able to say what sex they are just by identifying as it, because there's no clear lines anywhere. Who's to say otherwise? So that's sort of where the narrative kind of goes down. And then you bring up the fact that like, well, trans people aren't intersex. They're usually, unless they are,
Mm.
the vast majority of trans people are unambiguously male or female. They're using this intersex community, or maybe not community, but the fact that intersex people exist in order to somehow shoehorn their way into saying that sex isn't real and that they can identify whatever.
Mm.
I mean, it's pretty nuts. I rack my brain over it.
Yeah, I guess,
But
yeah, I'm asking you when you're like, I just come against them. I don't know why they do.
yeah, I mean, I'm trying to learn more about the reasons why, and I think a lot of it's because they have genuinely have dysphoria, but um, yeah, I think there needs at some point, especially when you start changing laws to reflect this reality. Like I'm more than happy to socially accept people as the sex that they claim that they
Uh-huh,
are.
uh-huh.
It's just it's a um, social fiction, I guess. But like I'm willing to play along because dysphoria is a real thing, and
Yeah,
I care about somebody, and I don't want them to be uncomfortable around me. And if I see them, they're putting in the effort, and they're wearing they're male and they're wearing female clothes, and they're doing their best to portray themselves. Like I'm not going to rain on their parade and call them a dude or something. Like
yeah.
that's just not who I am, and I have no problem with trans people and using their pronouns and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're gonna go ahead and then say in describe that into laws and saying that, oh no, you literally are the sex you claim you are, and then you get all of the rights and privileges associated with that sex, including playing in their sports and having access, going into their prisons, and all of
Right,
this. At that point, like there just needs to be an adult in the room that just says, we need to wait here because this is, we can socially accept these people, but like we cannot untether ourselves to the reality of the situation. Like
right,
there's still the sex that they were born as. There can be maybe some exceptions, and we can change something about legal sex, and we can have arguments about what legal sex should reflect, and all those types of things. But we can't just go ahead and open it up to something as arbitrary as self-identification. That's just a disaster waiting to happen for women, especially just because they fought so hard for their sex segregated spaces in order to avoid having to be in contact with males in many different contexts. And
right,
yeah, it's just you all those laws has become completely unenforceable if you just allow anyone just by pure self-identification, even if they don't change anything like about how
right.
they're I have a beard, I could just claim that I'm a woman either tomorrow, and I could if I could join a women's basketball team or something.
Right.
And I'd probably do pretty well.
Yeah. I
So,
know. But yeah, and then you'd be like, "Yeah, I'm just going to go in the locker room. Come on, guys. I mean, gals."
exactly.
But yeah,
So
so sorry, the question I have is like on the biology side, um why do we want to know, and why do we care to know what sex or gender someone is? Both. We care about both. But why do we? I want to know some. If you see someone who's sexually ambiguous, I want to know what they are. And I've thought of this. I've noticed this in my own thoughts of like it doesn't matter what they are in the end. I just want to know.
yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know the exact answer to that, but I mean, I can see psychologically speaking, from an evolutionary perspective, there are many traits associated with being male or female that just help us sort individuals in our daily life. You want to know who do you have to be more afraid of, who's going to approach you more aggressively for sexual contexts, or who do you have to watch out for more. So I mean, one of the first things I think you identify out somebody is their biological sex. Your brain just does this thing automatically, and that just it's a useful sort of heuristic to just navigate your world. I mean, it's important to know who are the individuals I could potentially hit on and mate with, and who do I have to be weary of. It's best, is this a familiar male face, or is this a foreign male face that I've never seen before and I need to worry? Because yeah, there's differences in behaviors and personalities between the sexes that knowing someone's sex does say maybe not a lot about like that individual, but like you can say that on average, this person is going to behave a certain way that I might be able to predict, you know, not 100% of the time, but it's pretty good what they're going to do, especially in traits like aggression and things like that, which are really, really useful to know
Right.
at a glance. So,
At a glance, literally, yeah. Because
yeah.
I've noticed that, and yeah, I don't know why, other than I just want to know. What are you? Like, I just want to know.
You ever seen the movie It's Pat before, that old movie?
No, what is it?
Julia Sweeney. It was just about this character that was just this androgynous character, and the whole movie was about the fact that nobody knew what sex they were, and everyone was trying to find out, but no one wants to
Oh, really?
directly. It's because nobody wants to like directly ask them, so they're all trying to like find out through indirect means, and it's
Yeah,
pretty. It's a funny movie. You should watch it.
I will. Like, that totally sounds like the exact conundrum that I am thinking of. We just
Yeah.
want to know. Like, we just like to put, I think that that's an important thing to remember is that humans like putting things in boxes because it's the way in which we navigate the world.
Definitely.
And it's
And sex is
not,
it's
what?
pretty and biological sex is a box that is, it's really important, especially evolutionary speaking, because this is how reproduction is based on. You need to know who you can potentially mate with or not, or who you're going to be, who you need to watch out for, who's potentially dangerous. So
Right. And
I can,
for
I can
females, who to
explain.
make an alliance with and who to backstab. No, just kidding. I've been thinking about like the difference between like the male hierarchy and female hierarchies and
Yeah,
how they're just so different.
yeah,
How they're
definitely.
anyways, they're just like
About the dynamics that go on.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I interviewed a lady named Marissa Orr my last interview, and I got a lot of I haven't gotten this much, but a lot of dudes commenting like, you want us to change work just for you ladies. I'm like, no, we just are exploring some differences. Okay, we're just looking at some, anyways. But that's the thing. The differences, like there are differences. Actually, that's the part that really confuses me. Is some activists are saying there's no difference. It's all socially constructed, and then on the other end, oh, there's huge differences because like I guess it's like the radical feminists, the trans exclusionary radical feminist types, like I know that that's derogatory to say, are saying like there is a difference, although they believe in social construction of gender as well, I believe. So that's extra confusing. And then on the other side, they're like, no, no, it's all constructed, so we can all choose anything. It's
Yeah.
very confusing where the problem lies.
Yeah. Well, so a lot of the gender critical feminists are now that the fact that a lot of males are sort of deciding they want to just identify their way into female spaces are really coming around now to the idea that sex differences are real, because they kind of rode this narrative before where everything was socially constructed and
Mm-hmm.
personality wise and everything like that. Differences in aggression, those are just by how boys were raised differently and things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
now that the fact that you're getting a lot of people saying like, you're right, there are no differences, and like I'm one of you, and they're identifying their way into these, into the female category. You're getting a lot of sort of these gender critical feminists that are now sort of being more open to the fact that maybe some of these what we called social constructs of gender are actually there are some innate differences, and I think ultimately it's going to come down to it's going to be a mixture of both. It's going to be, yes, there are some biologically based innate behavioral differences, average differences, not
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
utter differences between males and females. And it's also true that we have, social policing of gender norms as well on top of that
Mm.
could maybe people's behavior change as well.
Mm.
Two things could be true at once, and I think that's almost certainly the case in this situation.
Right.
Um, yeah, the key is to disentangle, how much of it is that social policing of gender norms, and how much is it of these innate differences, and
Right.
um, that's what it's going to come down to.
Yeah, sometimes like all the things are true at once. And so
Yeah,
that's why these things kind of get a bit messy. So coming back to the situation with you, Are you concerned about your career as a result of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I
So
mean, we can talk a little bit about what happened to our friend Bo Weingart.
exactly. Yeah, and not just with him too, but yeah, that's definitely a canary in the coal mine type situation.
Because
There were
Bo
others.
lost, is it he lost tenure? Or he was lost his tenure track position?
Yeah, so that they're not gonna. He had a tenure track position, and they're just not gonna renew his contract. So
Right.
as soon as he might even be done now, I'm not sure, but his as soon as his teaching, because he still was on schedule to finish up the semester or whatever, and so they just said they were not going to renew that, and so he's basically screwed.
Yeah.
And it's such a shame too, because academia is just not like so many other jobs. You have to go to school for 4 years to get your bachelor's, and then your PhD for another 5, 6, or more years sometimes, and then
Yeah.
do a postdoc for a few years just to get a chance to get a tenure track position, and just for them to fire him over ideological differences and certainly not scientific ones, because he went the right routes of publishing in the scientific journals. They just didn't like the heat they were getting,
Hmm.
and to basically kick Bo out on the curb like that, it's can be years before you're going to be able to get another position, if you could get one at all, because now that he's been fired and has this this stigma surrounding him now of being the person that was fired. You Google him now, and that's all you're going to see.
Yeah.
So they really just, they just destroyed the guy's career, and it's just such a shame. And I do worry. I think the chances I'll get a position in academia. I used to be more optimistic. I think it's pretty low right
Oh.
now. Um, I spoke. I won't give their names, but someone told me they were at a small liberal arts college, and they basically reached out to me and said that this was the chair of their biology department, and he said that he'd be very interested in hiring me as a professor there, and that he thinks he could get the faculty involved behind that choice, because he liked my new evolution deniers piece. He uses it in a class of his, and he just really liked the stuff I was doing. But then he said that it would almost certainly be impossible to hire me, though, because the HR would almost certainly block the hiring, because
Really?
they would Google me and they would see my social media presence, and they would want to avoid any sort of potential lawsuit of any student claiming that they feel unsafe or something like that. And I've heard that from a few different people. That was the most stark one, where it was literally the chair of a biology department saying that they would like to hire me, that they just
Hmm.
don't feel that would ever be possible. Um, yeah, and there's also other things with my old advisor. He's sort of being investigated for things right now, and people are trying to use the fact that I've published papers with him. They're using that to sort of say like, oh, I must be bad too, because
Guilt by
I
association.
yeah, by association. And so there's a lot working against me right now. So I'm sort of looking for an exit at the moment. I was
Hmm.
probably going to make the exit sooner, and I still might be doing it, but we're in a global recession pandemic right now, so it's
I know,
not
everything's on hold.
not a good time to be jobless. So we'll see. But I have other ideas. I'd like to do. This is sort of irrelevant to the podcast, but I guess I'm going to be doing like an online fitness and like nutrition type coaching thing, as well as
Well, I asked
uh,
you what you're up to, so like it's relevant.
yeah, and I plan to I'm planning on writing a book as well in the meantime, and um, yeah, more science journalism type things, and I'll
Hmm.
probably try to get a few things published in journals that are more like opinion pieces before I bow out of academia. But I'll still be around doing other stuff. I'd also like to do some sort of YouTube type interviews, kind of like what we're doing right now. But
Right.
so we'll see.
Well,
You
the
know,
thing is, it is important to have professors with like diversity of thought. That is, I mean, of course, within reason.
yeah,
Um, but because I did an interview with Jeffrey Sachs a couple back, and he was saying that is where he does think there's bias, and it's the hardest to prove, is the hiring of professors on the conservative end. And I'm not saying you're even on the conservative end. That's the
I don't
thing.
even know myself either. Yeah.
You're not at all. I know. like I know you're like on the left, but you're just not on the activist left.
Yeah.
But it's important to have and he was listing people, he gave examples of, people in a different space just from their own bias, seeing different angles of data and finding the bottom of, oh, you guys actually read this wrong. And of course, they tested it and stuff, but just seeing different angles of like the same concept from a different angle, and that's valuable. And that's
Yeah.
not going to happen if universities are only worried about PR, it seems like.
Yeah, I blame social media completely for all of this
Yeah.
because think
This this
about
this
how,
didn't happen before social media, right? This type
yeah,
of
yeah.
strong
Well,
bias.
if you think about how did you hire a professor before social media? Like, well, they would apply to a position. They have their application that has all their publications and everything like that. There's these norms of being interviewed where you can't ask certain personal questions, so
Mhm.
you can't ask them like what political party are you part of, and
Mhm.
reviews on abortion. Like, you're not going to ask those things during a job interview for good reason, because we
Mm.
realize these types of questions have no relevance whatsoever to their ability to be a psychologist or a biologist or a economist or whatever the position might be, professor in these fields. And now it's interesting because we still have those norms during the interviews. So we
Mm.
go to an interview and no one's going to ask what your political leanings are. If you're pro-choice or if you're about to have children, like, these are things they can't ask you during an interview. But that's information that they can then just obtain through a quick Google search, behind your back, essentially. And so
Mm.
I tweeted out before that, like, if you think it's unethical to ask these questions during an interview to gain this information about them, like, it should also be unethical for you to then snoop behind their back and obtain this information through any other route.
Mm.
So now having this ability to basically say, oh, these people are of this political persuasion, and it could even be unconsciously, they could just be rating them down and how they think they'd be a good colleague because they saw a picture of one individual and he was with someone, they had a MAGA hat. Maybe he didn't even wear one himself, but he was around someone or something. And it's just you're gonna be less likely to hire someone because people like being around people that are more like them.
Mm.
In the
Mhm.
past, you wouldn't know a lot about a person before you hired them. You just knew that they were a good scientist or economist or whatever. Able to get some cues here and there. But if they showed up to work once you hired them, and they turned out that they were vastly different political ideology than you, then this is like, well, you already hired them. They're there. You
Mm.
get that diversity. But now we just have the ability to just really just self-select and just perfectly curate who's going into the departments. And you betcha it's going to be people that are just towing that line of the diversity, equity, inclusion type things that is just of a very particular far left persuasion. And once you get that point, once you like keep getting these individuals and it gets more and more skewed, it just makes it even more likely that they're going to pick someone who's even more dramatically, radical on the political spectrum. And so I just think that social media has made it so it's gonna turn academia into these ideological monocultures, and I don't know any way to get rid of that except for changing the way we hire to just literally being just like an anonymous application or something. Just
Right, no
maybe
names.
it's like no name. Here's where I went to school. Here's my degree. Maybe even not even names of papers so they can't look up your paper, but just saying just the journal title so they can know if the journal is good. I published this, 5 papers in these top journals in the last year. Just those things, and just make the assessment based on the credentials of the person applying, and have no identifying information where they can, find out who this is. Are they going to be a good colleague? Well, what's a good colleague? To me, a good colleague, at least in the academia, is someone who's going to be scientifically robust. They're going to be able to cover for my blind spots in my research.
Mm.
But now, what's considered a good colleague is people who aren't going to rock the boat politically, and it's going to be very much like you. And I think I don't think they're consciously doing it. I think they think they're just selecting people that they like, and that unconscious process is just creating this ideological monoculture where they're just not going to be able to see their blind spots. And I think it's just terrible. I think it's going to destroy the universities. As
Well,
hyperbolic as that, I think it
well,
really
I
is.
mean, there's always a reaction to these actions, right? So I am nervous that super conservative colleges are going to start popping up where all of all the people who have been run out of town are like, okay, well, we'll just go here. But then, extremes can gather there as well on the other side, and then you'll get right wing and then far right wing. I don't know, like does that sound like something that could maybe happen? I just thought of it now. So maybe it's just not
Yeah,
really.
I mean, totally. There's, yeah, I can see. I think there's going to be more private universities probably that are going to have their own hiring process, but I do think you do run the risk of having
Like a
the same.
segregation politically almost.
Yeah, you don't want to. Ideally, you'd have a diversity of people in the same department. And when I say diversity, I don't. I'm not talking about like the diversity, equity, inclusion, and stuff you normally see, but the ideological diversity. And um, ideally, that would be in the same department because you don't want just departments of whole colleges that are only seeing things in one way.
Yeah.
Um, and some fields, the social sciences, they do lean liberal just because that's the political leanings of the people graduating. For some reason, it just attracts more liberals,
Mm-hmm.
and that's fine as long as there isn't any active or maybe not active as in terms of being consciously aware of it, but some process that's somehow selecting against conservatives in these fields. As long as it's okay to have a skew, as long as there's nothing that's keeping individuals out who are not of that political
Right.
orientation.
Like exclusions and whatnot. Yeah.
So I'm not for I don't think there should be any sort of like affirmative action for conservatives. I just
Right.
think that we just need to like level the playing field to make it so that there aren't any barriers to conservatives.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think I don't want to be like you have to interview one conservative
Right.
candidate.
No, and that seems,
That's
yeah,
not what I think it should be.
it gets kind of almost like you don't want to enforce these rules on universities where there is like, okay, so you're not allowed to let your HR run who you hire, like from like you don't want the government coming down and telling universities what to do. Like that scares me too. But you also want a fair shot for all different skews of
Yeah.
people on different parts of the spectrum too. So
I think everyone listening is going to think that I'm outing myself as conservative by like saying all this stuff, but like, yeah,
no,
I'm
I know you're
definitely,
not. Yeah,
yeah,
you're left. You're
I
on the
very much
left.
consider myself on the left. At least I used to. I'm sort of questioning myself now, but like atheist for universal health care, against the death penalty. I mean, you could almost go down the line of like leftist talking points, and I agree with almost all of them,
Yeah.
except for like the only things I think people will say I'm a conservative on is like, well, I don't hate capitalism, and I'm
You
like,
don't hate
I'm
cap.
okay. I'm okay with the second, having a gun ownership, within reason, and that's maybe about it.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, hey, I have a question actually. Also, and with your type, your scientific types of individuals on Twitter lately, I've seen a lot of sort of. I am more concerned with the name particular activist group here, more than the creationists or with the you know Christian right or I don't know whatever. Like there's certain where you were concerned with religion in the past,
yeah,
not just you, but I've seen a lot of people like list like a sort of do a comparison. Why is there that specific comparison with religion, particularly I suppose like almost old Bible Belt style Christianity versus the latest activism? Like why do we have that comparison?
so at least from my perspective, it has to do with where are the attacks to science and specifically evolutionary biology coming from.
Okay.
And in about 10 years ago, those 10, 15 years ago, or even more, those attacks were coming from the right.
Right.
For me, they were coming from young Earth creationists and intelligent design proponents, trying to get evolution not taught in schools, or at least trying to teach intelligent design alongside evolution in schools. or getting pamphlets put in textbooks with saying that evolution is only a theory, and like there's other, it needs to be just one of many theories or something like that.
Mm.
And so that was what I was dealing with before, because I was very active, sort of like the new atheist movement or whatever, arguing against the creationists and the intelligent design people. I was big on that. That was what I was doing. That's a big reason of why I'm an evolutionary biologist today, because I was in these arguments so much with them. I ended up reading so much about evolutionary biology, and then when it came to the point where I had to figure out what I wanted to do for school, it's just like, well, this is the most interesting subject to me, and I already know a decent amount of it. It's pretty fascinating, and so I just sort of doubled down on the evolutionary biology.
Yeah.
But now the attack. I mean, I sort of went over this in my evolution deniers piece, but like the creationists, intelligent design people, they're still there, but they're not really active anymore. They lost in the Kitzmiller Dover trial. They lost in court. They're really not that socially relevant anymore, I guess.
They're not looking to change any laws or anything like that anymore for education.
I'm sure they would like to. They just sort of don't have the power. They're just not as relevant as they used to be. They've just been easier to ignore, I suppose, because they haven't been very
active,
very powerful.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but now the problem is sort of different, because it's coming from the left, and it's an even worse problem, because in academia, I would have no problem when I was in grad school and stuff. I would argue against the creationists and stuff, and I had no problem arguing against these people on social media, because all the other evolutionary biologists were on my side. All the other people in academia, academia was on my side in that battle.
Okay.
But now the attacks to evolution are coming from within the academy, from people in the gender studies departments, and even in my own field. I mean, there's most of the people in my field, they completely disagree with me on just about everything.
Really?
I'm even arguing with them constantly on the reality of biological sex with like evolutionary biologists and ecologists, and it's just blowing my mind that people are denying this, and sex differences and all this stuff. And so it's more difficult because it's coming from within the university, and it's also really hard to root it out, because they're in there, and because of social media, it's even more left skewed to this type of ideology now. So it's going to be harder to remove, because creationism, intelligent design was never inside the university.
Right.
It was never a tumor that had to be removed. It was on the outside. We just had to successfully fend it off.
Right.
And that was really easy, because they just had no way to get in. And so so that's why I've shifted my focus, because I can ignore the creationists and intelligent design people now, because they're just out there doing whatever, and they're not that relevant.
Yeah.
But the attacks, it's almost like, I feel it's almost like what's that movie, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where like I'm just looking around, everyone looks like me, like we're all biologists. I'm like, which ones of you are the people who like don't think biological sex is a real thing? And
okay.
no one says anything until it comes down to it, and then they'll all just like, you realize that they all have the little pronouns in their bio, and that's how you can identify them by seeing which ones those people are. And yeah, it blows my mind, and I don't know how to get them out.
Well,
or change their mind.
Well, because it seems like within theory itself, there's the like feminist theory, and then trans theory, and they don't seem compatible within that gender critical theory, or just just feminist theory. Like it seems like they don't really mesh.
Well, there's like two branches of feminism now. I kind of classify them as the gender feminists, where they center like, what does it mean to be a woman? And what they say is woman as a gender identity. And so that includes males and anybody who can say, I identify as a woman. Like that's what that feminism is. Whereas a gender critical feminist, they're more like, their feminism is centered around females, because they, in my opinion, correctly identify that their historical oppression, and continued to this day in relevant ways, is not based on what is in their mind. It's based on their sex bodies as being females. and that's clearly the case. And I don't know how anyone could think that's not the case. I mean, if you have a sexist walking by and there's two females, but one of them identifies as a man, like, a sexist isn't going to care. They're going to treat you both the same.
Right.
They're not going to ask which one of you identifies as the woman. And they're like, oh, okay, now I know which one to be a sexist to. Like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
not how,
And a lot of that
not how,
feminist theory is like depending how society treats you, seeing you as a woman.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's the key. You can't see a brain, your brain state. It's a cryptic thing until you ask somebody. And so that's just not how people, that's not how society is like enforcing anything based on, on gender norms. You can't enforce gender roles on a completely cryptic trait of a mind.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it ends, though. Like where it's gonna go. I mean, if the Olympics happens, I don't know, with regards to this whole virus thing.
I thought it was going to be a big thing, but now it might not even happen anymore. The Olympics. So we'll see.
Is it the first Olympics where I didn't know if they were gonna do trans categories or not, or who they were gonna allow?
So, as far as I know, that we're going to allow trans women to play, but it was the first Olympics with the new rules that didn't require any like bottom surgery, and all it requires is like had like self-professed gender for I think a year or something like that, and then be on cross-sex hormones, just to have your testosterone if you're playing in the women's category as a male, to have your testosterone beneath, I think it's 5 nanomoles per liter, which is still like considerably higher than your average female.
Yeah.
So I think that was the first Olympics where they were removing all of those bars to it. And now that
would have been interesting to see, but now it's
yeah, and now trans is more of an ideology rather than just like a medical condition as it was before.
Yeah.
You're gonna it's a prediction, but you're gonna see a lot more trans athletes entering because what is considered trans is now just like exploded, and it's I could do it.
I know. Well, isn't it so odd, like that victory of a male over females? I'm like, how can that satisfy?
Yeah, no, it does though. If you look at Rachel McKinnon, Veronica Ivy is now her name. She's the bicyclist who's won gold medals and things.
Right.
It's the most smug person ever about it. She just constantly will go on Twitter and just like rub it in the women's faces. If they weren't all smiles when they were on the podium with her when she's holding up her gold medal, she just calls them out as bigots right there on Twitter. These people are terrible. It's like,
it's because they had their medal stolen. Well, I don't know when the next Olympics will be. Then I guess it'll be. So what it was Japan, right?
It was going to be Japan, and that was the summer one.
Okay, so whatever is the next.
I actually don't follow it too closely. I'm not.
But I'm interested to see how the world will react, though, with these new categories.
Yeah, it might change. I mean, if it's going to be delayed, it might. You never know. The rules might change now because I know some organizations like the World Rugby just had a recent, what do you want to call it, a conference or a symposium or something where they invited people from both sides. The trans women are women and belong in women's sports, and the opposite people, like me and whatever, who would argue the opposite. They brought in scientists from both sides to argue each point to sort of try to come up with a new trans inclusion or I guess potentially exclusion policy for rugby, because rugby is it's a very violent sport where you could just see a male just like totally dominate.
Yeah.
And this is not even just being dominating, but injuring the female competitors in there. I mean, this is a complete safety issue.
Yeah. And
so I think that they held this discussion group. Probably also because they want to avoid lawsuits if this happens. And
how did it end up?
So they're gonna. I don't think they've released their new revised policy yet, but they're gonna release all of the talks I think that people gave to be very transparent. It might even be available now, but I think I would have heard about it. I don't know if you know Emma Hilton on Twitter, the Fond of Beatles on Twitter.
Oh, maybe I saw her.
Yeah, she was the co-author for me on the Wall Street Journal article recently that we put out,
Oh,
and
okay.
she was actually there. She was called to
Oh,
be the people who was consulted
cool.
about the evidence of whether or not trans women have any sort of biological advantage that transfers over. So she's one of the best people to have on that panel, and you
It
should totally interview her too. I'm just going to plug her right now because she's
Okay,
awesome.
I will. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I'm always looking for people for the
yeah,
chats for the channels. Well, I just talking about this feels like you're like whether there's any advantage for biological males to compete. I'm just like, where are we? Are we in are we in like 1984? Like where are we? We of course there's an advantage, people. Like
it's bizarre how we have to like go out there and just like make these facts. You know, it's one of those things where like no one needed to gather data on it because it was like so obviously true.
yeah,
It would just be like, let's do a study on whether ducks like water. It's like no one's gonna like do that study because do we really need like a paper written about ducks and water to like realize that ducks like water? Like no. But given how pervasive this sort of denialism of biological sex and sex differences, they're actually forcing people to go out there and like give data on the fact that ducks like water.
right.
That's like what that's basically what we're doing right now. And so like, okay, we'll do it. Here it is.
But
Ducks
but
like water.
and it's not that you're wanting to make these people feel like inferior individuals. That's the thing is no one's trying to make anyone feel anything. It's just trying to be fair for women to have a
Yes.
chance because there's no I mean, I know that in like that bell curve that there's the strongest woman might be able to beat the weakest man, but overall women won't have a chance in sports if this continues and I women should have a chance to win. That's why we have a women's category.
I know.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the fact that people, if you look at the NBA for example, like the NBA and most, actually, I think most, if not all, of the main the big sports, like you have like the WNBA, the women's NBA, but the NBA isn't the MNBA. It's not the men's league. It's an
Right.
open league.
Right.
Anybody could be in the NBA. Like there's nothing
Really?
in their rules that say you can't draft a female.
I didn't know
Like it's
that.
just yeah, they can draft women if they want to. It's just no woman has ever been good enough to compete in the NBA because it's selecting for the elite of the elite of the elite among men, and there aren't women in that elite of the elite of the elite in the population as a whole,
Right.
just because of the average differences. I mean, we're talking about the tippity end of the tail.
Yeah.
Like you can't go any further out there. There's only so many players that can be in the league.
Right.
And if you mean just by height alone, I mean we know that NBA selects for being tall, and if
Right.
you're just looking at just height, I mean yeah, you get some people who are short and who can play in the NBA, but man, it's just yeah,
But
it's
those are
selects hard.
dudes.
It's a lot of traits that females happen to have, or just they don't tend to have. They don't tend to be as tall and as strong, and
As fast.
just the way. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay, well, is there anything else that you'd want to plug now that we're kind of winding down here? A
nothing at the
university to
moment.
hire you?
If they still want to, before I bow out, then I'll take it.
Because you're still
I
working now, right? Like you have a job currently.
yeah. Yeah, my contract at Penn State goes through June,
Okay.
so sometime around then, maybe I'll be out doing something else completely. We'll see.
Okay.
Uh, but either way, I don't think my online presence will change that much. Might increase, or who knows? I'll still be writing stuff and putting it out there.
Okay.
Probably more stuff's going to come out during these quarantine weeks than I have in the
Right.
last few months. So
May as well be
I'll be more
productive. Yeah.
for sure.
Okay, well, thanks for
Yes.
chatting, Colin. This was good. I think we went over the the core of these dealings.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.